Audio Jungle.
I am the Divine Prince, Tai Emmecca, Pan-African Spiritualist, Practitioner, Author, Advisor, Elagoon, Oloye, Hoodoo, Obeya, Bokur. I reside in this beautiful and legendary, historic Treme, New Orleans, Louisiana. So join me as I share food, music, culture, tradition, the rhythms, and the flavor of New Orleans voodoo. Respect the voodoo. Greetings, 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 honor and respect, honor and respect, honor and respect. Divine, all blessed greetings and salutations to you and yours. It is another live edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Voodoo Hoodoo 101, powered by, supported by NOIVD, New Orleans International Voodoo Day. Become a part of something extraordinary. New Orleans International Voodoo Day is not just an event, it is a movement that celebrates culture, fosters education, and connects people from around the globe. By sponsoring this event, you're supporting a tax-deductible cause that preserves heritage, uplifts art and education, and fosters healing within the community and beyond. Your sponsorship goes beyond promoting your business. It demonstrates your commitment to cultural preservation and education while supporting a unique event that bridges international recognition and brings the world to New Orleans. Events like symposiums, art exhibitions, sacred processions, and global speakers offer unparalleled opportunities to honor history and inspire a brighter future. Supporting an event like this means empowering a community, enriching cultural understanding, and making a meaningful impact on the world. It connects your brand to a celebration that values unity, diversity, and progress, while helping preserve traditions for generations to come. We continue to invite you, to welcome you, to offer you to join us in creating this powerful legacy by visiting us first at www.vodouday, again, www.vodouday.org, voodooday.org for more information and coming updates. Our tentative dates, I believe, are May 23rd and 24th. And Elder Reggie will correct me if I'm wrong about that moving forward. I certainly appreciate you all's participation, collaboration, and involvement in this powerful, powerful event. And I want to thank Bloody Mary of New Orleans for joining us, for my first priest and wild man, Joshua Nylan Tanner. D Goddess, thank you so much for being present. Elder Reggie, Green Soap, thank you so much for your continued support and participation on this platform. And the beloved Sister Toni Martinez, we certainly appreciate you and your continued support of this endeavor. And before I open everyone's mic, I want to bring us back to the focal point of our continuing ongoing theme and discussion. Tonight, we're going to talk about Queen Nanny and the origins of Jamaican obeah. The first documented use of the term obeah by Europeans in Jamaica was in a series of letters and personal records kept during the early 18th century in connection with Nanny of the Maroons. Nanny, a Jamaican national hero and the leader of a community of formerly enslaved Africans called the Windward Maroons, was famous among the British and Africans in Jamaica for her tactical genius, brutally effective guerrilla tactics, and her obeah. Historians have tended to argue that the Maroon mastery of guerrilla warfare played a significant role in their success. But many of Nanny's contemporaries attributed her leadership skills and the Maroons' ultimate victory to her Obia power. For British administrators, of course, these labels were derogatory. Colonial sources attacked Nanny in a number of ways, ranging from referring to her as the rebels' old Obia woman, a label intended to associate Nanny with European witches, to characterizing her as unsexed and more bloodthirsty than Maroon men. However, the Maroons embraced Nanny's Obia and Maroon oral traditions, discuss her feats in detail. And according to Maroons, Nanny used her Obia powers to kill British soldiers in Nanny's pot, a boiling pot without a flame below it that soldiers would lean over and fall into to quickly grow food for her starving forces and to catch bullets and either fire them back or attack the soldiers with a machete. Therefore, historians must not discard her Obia outright. Obia was not just a derogatory label, but a tool for healing and a weapon of war recognized by the British, enslaved Africans, and free Maroons. By carefully balancing those three perspectives, this chapter in our story aims to introduce Jamaican ideas about Obia by following the First Maroon War. The actual dates of the First Maroon War have been disputed by its contemporaries and historians since it took place. Maroon oral history suggests that the war began around 1655, immediately following the British capture of Jamaica and spanning approximately 85 years until the British government in Jamaica signed treaties with the Maroons in 1739 and 1740. Orlando Patterson, prominent among scholars who follow this stance, argues that almost all the revolts prior to 1740 were closely related and cannot meaningfully be separated from each other or from the events of the last 15 years of that period, which the revolts reached a dramatic climax. Records from the colonial archives, however, suggest that the war lasted for only 10 years. Historians have tended to discard this claim because, as Patterson neatly points out, there was nothing from a social, cultural perspective to distinguish these climatic final years. They represent only a heightened state of military and political tension that had begun 70 years prior, acknowledging the more likely case that the revolts from 1655 to 1740 were connected. This chapter in our story will offer a short background of the war leading up to Nanny's involvement. However, because the primary focus of the chapter is on Obia, the time period of greatest interest began in 1728, when the British sent more troops to Jamaica and changed the balance of power with Nanny's Windward Maroons. It is mostly from this point that the British and Maroon sources attest to her powers. England captured Jamaica from Spain in 1655 as part of Oliver Cromwell, the Lord Protector of England's grand design on the Spanish possessions in the New World. And although the Spanish occupied Jamaica for more than 150 years, they did little to develop the island, and Cromwell took it only as an afterthought following the failure to take Saint Dominique, which we now know as Haiti. The population in 1655 was estimated at no more than 3,000, more than half of whom were enslaved. The Spanish had eradicated most of the native inhabitants of the island, with a few escaping to the mountainous interior and a few being subjected to slavery. The Spanish had also sent other enslaved persons, including those who belonged to religious minorities, Jews and Moors, to Jamaica but enslaved Africans still made up the majority of the island's residents. These divisions would only grow during England's rule. Jamaica held much more potential for England as the largest British island in the Caribbean, but its development would continue to be hindered by nearly continuous slave revolts and uprisings. When England invaded, most of the Spanish colonists fled. Many escaped the island entirely and left the Africans they had enslaved as free men and women, while a few explicitly freed their workers and fled inland together. Still, others put up a strong guerrilla resistance, and England placed Jamaica under military rule for the first 5 years of occupation, until the last of the Spaniards were finally killed or forced to leave. In 1660, England established a civil government in Jamaica, and hundreds of white immigrants brought with them thousands of enslaved Africans. Although life in Jamaica was never stable owing to disease, natural disasters, pirating, and internal political strife, certain divisions started to solidify. As far as planters were concerned, their success balanced on their ability to manage two groups of Africans: those who enslaved, who made up a growing proportion of Jamaica's labor force, and the Maroons, who were always a threat. The word maroon is derived via French from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or untamed, and usually referred to runaways, castaways, or the shipwrecked. Those marooned probably would never return. This also described how the land-owning classes felt about the Maroons. They were an uncivilized and undeveloped group of Africans who threatened the land-owning classes because they were militaristic, and also because a society of free Africans was a source of hope for the Africans still enslaved on plantations. British planters and colonial administrators had several reasons to slander the Maroons. In reality, many of the Africans who had escaped slavery by the Spanish, together with Africans and persons of mixed heritage, were already free. Some native Tianos and future escapees coalesced into a number of ethnically diverse groups in the Jamaican interior. And it should be noted that even in the communities where they were few and were quickly dominated by Africans, in world historical terms, the impact of Tiano culture on Jamaica is far from negligible, but their contributions will not be discussed at length in this conversation. The early Maroons can roughly be divided into two groups. One created Stockade Mountain Farms at Ludis Valley under Juan de Bolas, and others gathered at the western end of Cockpit Country under Juan de Sorayas, the Carmali Maroons, as they were called. And during the first decade of English rule, these groups actively fought on behalf of the Spanish. However, as it became increasingly obvious that the British would hold their conquests, the group run by de Bolas changed its position. Faced with defeat at the hands of the British in 1659, the Maroons at Luedas Valley turned against the Spanish. The remaining Spanish colonists were finally expelled from Jamaica in a raid led by de Bolas in 1660. In exchange, Governor Sir Charles Littleton signed the first Maroon Treaty in 1663, granting de Bolas and his people land on the same terms as English settlers. The colonial authorities then paid Bolas to hunt the other African Maroons. the supporters of De Soraus, as well as recent runaways. British authorities failed to subdue the Kamali Maroons, who eventually killed De Boles as part of an ambush. However, the British had established a precedent for negotiating with and coercing help from the Maroons against other Africans. The surviving Maroons initially remained independent in the Blue Mountains, subsistence farming and occasionally raiding plantations to survive. And although these Maroons mostly disappeared from the historical record for the next few decades, some historians hypothesize that they joined to form what would later be called the Windward Maroons under Nanny. If they were not already merged, then Sir Henry Morgan's campaigns against the Kamali Maroons in the 1670s and 1680s probably pushed them towards the Windward Maroons. From early on, Morgan and other Jamaican governors considered the Maroon settlements an impediment to English development of the interior. Furthermore, over time, other Africans escaped slavery by joining one of the Maroon communities, and still more saw the promise of free communities of Africans if they could only slip away from their plantations and survive the journey into the mountains. By the end of the century, Maroons controlled much of Jamaica's mountainous interior, as well as Morgan's 3 campaigns. Colonial authorities ordered raids on the Maroon settlements in 1686 and 1702, to little effect. To the British, the mere existence of Maroon communities was a threat they could not stamp out. And this fear transferred to the Deep South. Certainly after the Haitian Revolution in the later 1700s, going into the early 1800s, this fear only increased. And tensions were also heightened as a consequence of England's increasingly aggressive campaign of bringing new enslaved persons to Jamaica. Of course, more enslaved plantation workers who brought and revivified African identities led to new communities building among those enslaved. And between 1673 and 1690, there were several major uprisings that plantation owners attributed to the new arrival of highly militarized Coromantes, as they were referred to, from the Cape Coast and Ashanti Empire in what is now Ghana. Stereotypes about the brutality and tactical expertise of Coromantes were growing, and indeed there were many Ashanti leaders in Jamaican revolts. However, there were also significant demographic changes for the Jamaican Maroons. Although more runaways were joining Maroon communities, many of the Maroons were still the descendants of Africans who were freed or abandoned by the Spanish. On July 31st, 1690, a rebellion involving 500 enslaved Africans from the Sutton estate in Clarendon Parish led to the formation of a new and highly organized group of Maroons. And despite British efforts to quell the rebellion, over 200 survivors fled to the western parts of the Cockpit country, where they founded a set of loosely associated towns. Here, an Ashanti man named Cujo, who had escaped slavery almost as soon as setting foot on Jamaica, emerged as the most famous ruler of the Western Maroons based in Cujo's town, also called Trelawney, Trelawney, Trelawney town. Further to the east, Quayo, Quao, Quayo, another Ashanti man, and Nanny of the Maroons became key leaders of the Westward Maroons. The Westward Maroons in the wilder parts of eastern Jamaica were comprised of separate highly mobile and culturally heterogeneous groups. Nanny, also known as Granny Nanny, Grandee Nanny, and Queen Nanny, was a Maroon leader and Obia woman active in Jamaica from sometime near the end of the 17th century until her death around 1755. There are several versions of her early story, and while it is not clear which is accurate, historians have held that she was born in the Akan-speaking Ashanti tribe around 1686. Oral traditions maintain that she was always free and came to Jamaica of her own accord. She was probably of royal descent and might have even enslaved other Africans herself. Historians have widely assumed that Nanny arrived in Jamaica as a captive, but precisely how she arrived and when are not certain, and she probably escaped from slavery quickly. If the Maroon narratives are given at least some credibility, then Nanny was probably at least a teenager and already a successful military leader when she arrived in Jamaica. At the very start of the 18th century, then Nanny and Quayle founded a village in the Blue Mountains, which became known as Nannytown. By about 1720, a stronger Wynwood community had developed around the culturally Africanized group of 3 villages known as Nannytown, under the spiritual leadership of Nanny, by then more frequently known as Queen Nanny. Nannytown, placed as it was in the mountains away from European settlements and difficult to assault, thrived. Its strategic location overlooking Stony River via a 270-meter ridge made surprise attacks by the British near impossible. Nanny limited her attacks on plantations and preferred instead to farm and trade peacefully with her neighbors. Some historians have speculated that the remnants of original Jamaican Maroons joined under Nanny either by directly assimilating into Nannytown or through their alliance networks. Nanny also grew her numbers through successful raids to free as many as 1,000 enslaved Africans from plantations during her lifetime. Nanny's arrival in Jamaica also made her story more compelling to contemporary enslaved Africans who dared to escape to the mountains. And unlike other Maroons, who by 1700 were mostly descendants of early escapees, generations removed from the new arrivals, Nanny had escaped her slave status with immense success. She was an Akan, and like them, who beat the British and had spiritual powers that could help them. While scholars credit Nanny's success to her tactical prowess, Maroon oral histories say that Nannytown's defenses were also because of Nanny's Obia powers. One legend claims that if any straight-haired white man goes to Nannytown, he is immediately struck dead. There were not just Maroon stories, however. Obia ignited significant fear among the British colonists because it was believed to be responsible for maintaining Maroon community strength. England's witchcraft laws were still in effect through 1735, and official paranoia about conjuration, enchantment, witchcraft, and sorcery usually reflected a more prominent on-the-ground fear. For British subjects living in Jamaica, those witchcraft fears were pinned on the Obia woman. Nanny was what the planners had been taught to fear, and passages about Nanny as unsexed and bloodthirsty furthered the witchcraft imagery that painted her as evil among the colonists. And again, this attitude carried into North America, certainly affected the Deep South here and how we were treated, how we moved, how we organized, and subsequently why they beheaded and hung Saint John Milo and the Maroons from New Orleans East in Jackson Square. I want to bring in my co-host. Greetings, beloved Joshua Nylan Tanner. Please open your mic. Come on in. Then Elder Reggie Green Soap. Please open your mic and come on in. And then Sister Toni Martinez. All is a blessing.
Good day, everyone. Hope you guys having a good evening. That was some very good information about the Jamaican and the Obeo culture there. That was very powerful and also remnant to the history, a lot of the history that I hear and know of here in the South, in the deep South, the Seminoles and the Indians. A lot of people they don't realize how long wars were during that time against Maroons and indigenous peoples of this land. It was a lot longer than what we see today. It wasn't a 4-year war. 80 years, that's a long period of time. That's most lifetimes. I mean, some people don't even live that long, as we all know. Go ahead, Elder Reggie. Come on.
Blessings, Divine Prince. Blessings, Sister Toni. Blessings, Joshua. Blessings to all in the chat. Very interesting information that came forward. Like I said before, I just don't have a strong background on the Jamaican history, but I'm welcome to learn more, and I enjoyed everything. But what I would like to add to the conversation tonight is something that's beginning. I'm seeing it a lot on Instagram, and it's not settling well with me. Whatever Essence went through, there are FBA people saying that it's due to the African leadership now with the Essence organization. So why divide a house? If we're African Americans, and if African leadership is running the Essence Fest, why attack and divide it? That is just not setting well. But that's what I wanted to add. Sister Toni?
Hey everyone, how you doing? Greetings to everyone out there and listening in the chat. Also, Divine Prince, Joshua, and Elder Reggie. Um, it seems to always be when a change is going to come or they want to make a change, they start to divide and conquer. They start turning us against each other. Apparently they said Essence wasn't that big. It wasn't this, that, and the other thing. They were blaming Lauryn Hill for a 3 a.m. set when she was supposed to be on at 12. They said it wasn't her fault. They blamed it on Essence. A lot of stuff is going on in the world right now. A lot of people are saving their money. It's too much uncertainty going on with the regime that's in power right now. A lot of people aren't taking vacations. A lot of people aren't spending extra money. They batten down their hatches because they fear benefits they're going to have going to be taken away. One thing we should have learned from the past is that we do better when we stand together. We always seem to fall for the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Europeans are wanting to take over Essence, similar to how they did with other venues, BET, and other things that we started off, they ended up taking. So we just have to kind of be on guard for that kind of stuff. And regarding Nanny, I was just thinking about, pirates were big in that time, especially coming from all the islands like Cuba, Jamaica, all the Caribbean islands, coming back to New Orleans, Louisiana, bringing all these stories into the market place, what we call a French market, scaring the bejesus out of slave masters. And I think maybe those stories may have really inflamed the fear. And just like the slave masters heard the stories, the enslaved heard the stories as they were serving dinner, as they were in the kitchen cooking, as they were sweeping outside the door of
Correct.
master's study. So it was a lot going on with that. And that's why I kind of think, down south, the enslaved had to really go underground with their voodoo and hoodoo, because those tales were getting back to them from the islands via the pirate ships. Um,
I agree. I agree,
New,
Tony. And I
New,
think most people don't understand that, man. It was a matter of life and death. It wasn't a matter of, oh, we'll have a talk with you and sit down and have a conversation with you about it. It was a matter of taking action, and you're going to be beheaded, or you're going to be made an example of. Period. It wasn't a matter of, I'm not coming in to be a missionary and be like, oh, let's see if we can save this person. No, they're not saving nobody. It looked like they was representing anything of that nature because of the fear of it. So you can look at a lot of different parallels of how that showed up in the world during that time, with witch trials and all over the world, in Europe, and that's how they handled. If they handled women that way, how you think they handle people of a different culture and different background and a different complexion?
correct, correct. And a lot of people don't realize how pirate friendly the city of New Orleans was. New Orleans was already a very corrupt city. I mean, we got the Jean Lafitte, Lafayette,
Mhm.
all of these people coming in and out, and a lot of people don't realize that by water, just how close we are to those islands. What,
Right.
Cuba's only like 90 miles out?
Yeah, I've been down to Key West, so you can take a freaking boat from Key West and get to the island in a matter of an hour.
Yeah, and they really ran hiding
Um,
from the British, because they was robbing them and bringing it to New Orleans. New Orleans was very corrupt, and it was the main passageway where the plantation owners had to come to do business. Plantation owners were often gone weeks at a time from the plantation throughout the year. One thing was to get news of what was going on in other areas, because the newspapers at those times wasn't really that good. A lot of stuff was word of mouth.
Mhm.
was
So, they finally recognized just how great Nanny was. Her face is on the money in Jamaica now with the 500. What they use, pounds or dollars? The 500 bill. They have Nannyville, which they
they
named
never
after
refer to
her,
pounds.
started in 1977. So she's very known. They have busts and statues of her. She's very known now as being a Jamaican hero with her Obeah and her military skills
Yeah,
highlighted. I still think a lot of people in Jamaica today fear Obeah. Obeah.
you saying it right, Tony.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Obey.
I think they still fear it. Um, because a lot of them are Christianized with the Bible that says suffer a witch and all this other stuff about witchcraft and this, that, and the other thing. They King James, the magical book. And it's just, the waterways, everything traveled through these waterways, and the water has been, and the marshes and the swamps have always been our friend. And that's why I just had to laugh at the regime today being so happy because they opened up with their naming alligator Alcatraz and how they just waiting for the first Hispanic captive to try to get away and get eaten by alligator. No, you underestimate people.
Yeah.
Some of those people as children been
Play
through
that.
more than that to get to the United States in the first place.
And swim with sharks.
Yes. So, it's very interesting to see. We may have to just revert back to learning from our ancestors, trying to decide how we need to live. Me and the Divine Prince talked about this in Lent over time, and we decided the best place to be in the event of anything was set off as fighting in this country. The best place to be would be the South, because the swamps can feed us, the swamps can hide us. All we got to do is be brave enough to go into them. And I think we could do that. I think we really could do that.
I
So,
agree. Yeah.
And then
And
the weather probably won't freeze us.
Yeah, that's where we survived that. That's where, that's but the funny thing is, Divine Prince talked about how the British Army utilized Natty for healing and medicine and stuff. So all that stuff comes out of the swamp. And people underestimate the impact and the influence and the health of this country because of the knowledge and the information from the swamp and from many other places in this country, where people have learned how to live off the land and learn how to grow and be civilized and one with nature and live with nature in that way.
Well, our time is coming to an end, and I want to turn it over to Elder Reggie to close us out. Elder Reggie, what are your thoughts?
Yes, lest we forget, the spiritual medicine of voodoo brings healing and relief from the shackles of slavery that bind the master and the slave to the same chain of social division. And we know some of the slaves did run off of plantations, and they were maroons in the hillsides, the swamps, in whatever location it was. But even when they was away from the plantation and away from the masters, they had social cohesion. They worked it together. They tried to become an organized force to get things done. So today in 2025, and I'm bringing this back home with the division I'm seeing on Instagram, is telling me we're not working from social cohesion as a unit. Divided, you fall. And I hope that we don't fall because of our own doing. I'm speaking of African Americans, and people of color in general, because the internal strife, the internal warfare would pull us apart and cause our demise. With that, I'll say thanks again, Divine Prince, for an awesome show, for your contribution, Sister Toni, Brother Joshua, those in the chat room. It's always good to see your face. And tentative, as Divine Prince said earlier, May 23rd, May 24th, so plan accordingly. What I say, Ashe, oh, good night, everyone.
Vodou.
Good night.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Camille Nilata, the teacher for our 4-week dance class series. Every week, it's on a different beat. You don't need any dance experience. You're just going to have fun and get your groove on. Every Thursday, starting July 10th through July 31st, 6:30 to 7:30 at the New Orleans Healing Center on St. Claude. Come on in, have fun, and get your groove on. Thank you, and look forward to seeing you. Greetings, everyone. I'm